Imagine an aircraft that could not only fly, it could change the outcome of a war. An aircraft born not in the silence of laboratories but in the fear of looming defeat. It appeared when the air itself felt hostile, when every shadow in the sky could become a threat, and when the fate of the entire world depended on who would climb above the clouds first. This aircraft, the P-51 Mustang, was created as an answer to despair. Fast, long-range, lethally precise, it didn't just fight, it hunted. When the enemy thought he was safe, the Mustang was already diving, turning steel, fire, and speed into one thing, a weapon of victory. In 1940, the world was engulfed by the flames of World War II, and the fate of many nations hung by a thread. Germany was advancing rapidly across Europe, and even the staunchest powers were struggling to hold back Hitler's army. Great Britain became the last bastion of resistance in Western Europe, teetering on the brink of isolation after the fall of France. The German Navy and Air Force were encircling the island nation from sea and sky, forcing it to face daily threats. The Nazis' superiority in technology and numbers was palpable, and one of the chief tasks became strengthening the Royal Air Force to protect Britain's skies from the Luftwaffe. It was in this desperate struggle that the idea of creating a new American aircraft was born, an aircraft that would later become a legend, the P-51 Mustang fighter. British engineers and strategists understood they needed not just a new airplane, but something that could fly far, fast, and maneuver in ways no fighter of the time could match. And although domestic manufacturers like Supermarine and Hawker were already working on improvements, production capacity simply couldn't keep up with wartime demands. So Britain turned to an ally that had not yet entered the war but possessed enormous industrial potential, the United States of America. In August 1940, the British Purchasing Commission contacted the American aircraft firm North American Aviation. The initial request was simple: build the existing Curtiss P-40 fighter under license. It was a decent aircraft, but already becoming outdated. Its range was insufficient, and its maneuverability mediocre compared to the best Luftwaffe fighters. At this point, North American Aviation's president, James Kindleberger, proposed not copying someone else's machine but developing their own. He was confident his company could create a fundamentally new aircraft, faster, longer-ranged, and more efficient. The British, in a desperate situation, agreed, but set a strict condition. If a prototype was not ready within 120 days, the project would be cancelled and funding cut off. This ultimatum began a race against time in which everyone was at risk, the engineers and Britain's defense alike. The design team at North American Aviation, led by the charismatic and talented chief engineer Edgar Schmud, began to work without pause. They embraced innovative approaches. Instead of traditional thick wings, they opted for thin, laminar-flow wings that reduced drag. They gave the aircraft a long, aerodynamically sleek fuselage. Schmud aimed for the Mustang to be not just another fighter, but a true breakthrough. Only 117 days were spent on development, construction, and test preparation, less than the deadline. This was an engineering feat in itself. On September 9, 1940, the prototype designated NA-73X took to the sky. Its first flights revealed astonishing potential. It was fast, easy to handle, and capable of flying distances unavailable to most fighters of the time, yet it had one drawback: the engine. The prototype was fitted with the Allison V1710, an American engine that performed well at low and medium altitudes but quickly lost power up high, precisely where the fiercest aerial battles were fought. The Luftwaffe dominated the skies with high-altitude Messerschmitt Bf-109s and Focke-Wulf FW-190s, which outmatched the Allison-powered Mustang. Thus, early in its career the airplane could not realize its full potential. Even so, it impressed the British, and the first batches were ordered for reconnaissance and low-altitude fighter duties. No one yet knew that a true breakthrough lay ahead, when the Mustang would receive a new engine, the British Rolls-Royce Merlin, that would turn it into one of the most famous and effective fighters of World War II. Thus, the Mustang's origin story became a symbol of how desperate circumstances and bold decisions can produce something exceptional. No one could have predicted that this urgent, almost risky project would grow into an aircraft that would secure Allied air supremacy and become the terror of Nazi pilots. But it all began in 1940 with a letter from the British Commission, North American Aviation's proposal, and the fearless choice to forge a new path rather than copy the old. The Mustang was born not out of convenience, but out of necessity and faith in the future. The second stage in the Mustang's creation is a record-setting development effort, an example of how engineering audacity, speed, and teamwork can transform the course of a war. After the British gave the green light to North American Aviation, American engineers faced an almost impossible task: create an entirely new fighter in a matter of months. Any mistake could mean failure and the loss of the contract, but the team not only met the deadline, they produced such quality that the project became a benchmark for rapid development under crisis. Having received Britain's approval to create a new fighter, North American Aviation swiftly began work on the prototype designated NA-73X. The project's chief engineer, Edgar Schmud, a man of iron will and exceptional aerodynamic insight, immediately set the team on an innovative path. He knew that repeating old, proven solutions wouldn't deliver the needed edge. They needed a fighter that would fly faster than the air, squeeze out every bit of performance, and set a new standard in design. Schmud rejected compromises and decided to build a fighter from scratch, not relying on traditional templates. One of the key innovations was the use of a laminar-flow wing, a new engineering approach that minimized drag. These wings allowed the Mustang to reach higher speeds with lower fuel consumption, especially over long distances. This decision later became one of the airplane's main trump cards, securing its superiority over rivals. At the time, few design bureaus possessed the knowledge and experience to create such wings, and Schmud's team was among those pioneers. But the wings weren't the only key to success. The designers decided to simplify maintenance as much as possible so that the aircraft could be quickly and efficiently serviced on forward airfields. They carefully considered the entire fuselage, from fuel tank placement to access panels for mechanics. The Mustang had to be not only fast and deadly but also practical to operate. Every single day counted. The factory ran 3 shifts, engineers barely left the drawing boards, and managers personally oversaw each production stage. It was a rare example of how a common drive to build the best could flourish under wartime pressure. Only 117 days passed from signing the contract to the first flight, 3 days ahead of the deadline. On September 9, 1940, the NA-73X roared into the sky from Inglewood, California. Its flight became a historic event, proving that the impossible was possible. Testing revealed not only strengths but also weaknesses. The aircraft was indeed very fast and aerodynamically refined, but the Allison V1710 engine used on the early models prevented the machine from reaching its full potential. It provided good thrust at low altitudes but lost effectiveness above 45,000 meters, critical for air combat over Europe. Despite that, the British placed a large order. The Mustang was excellent as a low-altitude fighter reconnaissance aircraft, and its fate could still change. No one suspected that, thanks to later modernization with the Merlin engine, this airplane would become one of the greatest combat machines in history. But it was during this record-setting development phase that its foundation was laid in fast, risky, and bold engineering that became the feat of an entire team. In the Mustang's creation there are many turning points, but one stands out above the rest: the decision to install the British Rolls-Royce Merlin. If the first Mustang was a promising yet limited aircraft, after this upgrade it became a true symbol of air dominance. The Mustang stopped being just another American airplane and became the fighter that changed the rules of World War II. The path was far from linear, beginning with doubts and experiments, and only through bold choices and a deep understanding of wartime technical demands did the aircraft undergo its own revolution. In the early 1940s, P-51s with Allison engines were used by the British as reconnaissance and low-altitude attack aircraft. Even then, the Mustang displayed remarkable aerodynamics, mid-altitude speed, and excellent range, making it perfect for certain tasks. But the war imposed harsh requirements. It was being fought at high altitudes, where German bombers were chased and Luftwaffe fighters clashed relentlessly, and there the Mustang was weak. The Allison V1710 was reliable and strong at low and medium altitudes, but in the upper air it lost thrust quickly. This didn't just limit the Mustang as a combat machine, it meant that, no matter how superb the design, it couldn't fulfill its main role in the struggle for air superiority. Proposals from British engineers became the key to the great turning point. They saw the Mustang's potential and knew that under the right conditions it could be great, and they suggested the solution: replace the engine. The Allison wasn't suited to high-altitude air combat, but the British Rolls-Royce Merlin, the same engine that powered the Spitfire and the Mosquito Night Fighter, was built for high altitude. With its two-stage supercharging, it could maintain significant power even at 800,090,000 meters. It literally unlocked the Mustang's potential. In late 1942, at Rolls-Royce facilities in Britain, the first experimental installations of the Merlin on the Mustang airframe began. This was an entirely new configuration requiring a redesigned cowling, air intake, and internal elements. But the tests were stunning. An aircraft that had struggled to climb to where the great battles unfolded now reached speeds up to 710 km per hour and commanded the vertical with ease. For high-altitude combat, that meant not only technical but also psychological superiority. The results showed that the Merlin-powered Mustang could fly faster than almost any contemporary fighter, even the famed Spitfire and Bf-109, and, more importantly, fly far. The Mustang already had a large internal fuel tank and excellent aerodynamics, but the Merlin let it fly hundreds of kilometers farther without refueling. That meant the P-51 could now accompany bombers on the most dangerous missions over Germany, Czechoslovakia, Austria, and provide cover even when Germany launched the attack. This solved one of the main strategic problems the US and Britain faced, the lack of a long-range escort fighter. Because of the shortage of escort fighters, the Americans had been suffering heavy losses in their daylight raids over Germany. Formations of B-17s and B-24s entered Reich airspace under fighter cover, but that cover could not fly beyond its range. Beyond the line where P-47s or Spitfires turned back, the bombers were almost defenseless against attacks by heavy German fighters like the Me-110 or single-engine interceptors. The Luftwaffe shot down dozens of airplanes in a single day. They needed a fighter that could see the mission through and return with the group, and that fighter became the Merlin-powered P-51. Production of the new model, designated P-51B, began in the US, with Packard building the Merlin under license. An improved version, the P-51D, followed, pairing the classic engine with a teardrop canopy and other refinements for better pilot visibility. This P-51D is the aircraft familiar from documentaries, photographs, and veterans' memoirs. When the Mustang began escorting American bombers over Europe, the air war started to change. German pilots, accustomed to hit-and-run tactics and avoiding direct engagements with bombers, now faced a fast, long-range fighter that could pursue them even as they tried to evade or head home. It was a turning point in the air war. The 193rd, 354th, and 357th Fighter Groups began flying the Mustang in 1944 and immediately achieved stunning success. Reports from the time are full of terse, striking lines: "Our bombers reached the target, losses halved, Mustangs intercept German jets." Yes, the Merlin Mustang could even catch the Me-262, something once thought impossible. The service of the 332nd Fighter Group African-American pilots known as the Red Tails was especially memorable. Flying P-51DS with red tail surfaces, they became legends. They escorted American bombers without losses, mission after mission, and enemy pilots did not want to see those red tails behind them. The Mustang became not only a weapon of war but also a symbol of justice, proof that talent, courage, and professionalism do not depend on skin color. By summer 1944, the Mustang had become the Allies' principal long-range fighter and took part in the largest air operations, from Big Week to raids over Berlin and the Ruhr. Events in the skies over Germany and France clearly showed how dramatically the balance of power shifted after the Mustang with the Merlin appeared in numbers. The Luftwaffe began to lose the initiative, and the Allies gained it. The Merlin-powered P-51 became more than a mere airplane. It embodied Allied cooperation, the British engine in an American airframe, created to defend the world against dictatorship. It became an example of how engineering can literally change the course of history. If the first Mustangs were merely good machines, the later versions became true kings of the sky aircraft the Germans tried to avoid and the Allies revered. By war's end, 4 of the 7 top-scoring American aces flew Mustangs. The Mustang became not only the best escort fighter but one of the most successful fighters, period. When the first Merlin Mustangs arrived on European airfields, the air war had reached a crisis peak. The Luftwaffe still retained control over many sectors of the sky, and despite enormous industrial and aviation potential, the Allies could not fully escort their bombers on long routes. Before the Mustang, long-range escort was a story of pain and tragedy. Dozens of heavy bombers sent out on missions returned with severe losses or did not return at all. That began to change in December 1943 with the arrival of the P-51B, the first Mustang in the role of a true escort fighter. Among the first to fly Mustangs were the U.S. 354th Fighter Group under the 9th Air Force and pilots of the 4th Fighter Group under the 8th Air Force. The Mustang's first combat employment occurred on December 7, 1943, escorting American bombers to targets in Germany. Although they didn't engage that day, the mere presence of a high-flying, fast, long-range fighter was a powerful psychological factor for both allies and enemy. The true baptism of fire came on December 13, 1943, when Mustangs escorted flying fortresses in a raid on Kiel. In that engagement, Mustang pilots first faced Bf-109s and Fw-190s in direct combat. By day's end, the Mustangs had downed 7 German aircraft without losing a single plane. It was a shock to the Luftwaffe and a signal to the Allies. A new master had appeared in the skies. With the Mustang's arrival, the escort fighter role changed fundamentally. Where escorts had previously patrolled over the bomber stream and turned back when fuel ran low, Mustangs now flew all the way to the target and back. They began to strike enemy airfields, destroying interceptors during takeoff and disrupting planned attacks. The new tactic of aggressive escort meant the Luftwaffe started losing aircraft not only in the air but also on the ground. Gradually, the Mustang became the main tool of the American air offensive. During Big Week, February 2025, 1944, a massive series of airstrikes on German industry, Mustangs demonstrated their power at scale for the first time. They escorted bombers deep into the Reich, shot down dozens of German planes, and hit ground targets. The Allies lost many bombers in those days, but without Mustangs the losses would have been far higher. Fighter pilots said, "We weren't just escorting. We were hunting." The moral shift was as important as the technical one. Bomber crews, seeing fast, agile Mustangs behind them, felt they were no longer abandoned after leaving the safe zone. Their confidence rose, and their fear of enemy fighters diminished. This bolstered the spirit of the entire air campaign. German pilots soon learned to fear the Mustang's power. They especially dreaded attacks from above, the diving strike, when a Mustang would slash into a formation at tremendous speed, scattering it before the fight even began. Through the clouds, they looked like silver spears, one German pilot recalled, describing Mustangs diving from altitude. By spring 1944, the Mustang was more than an escort, it had become the symbol of Allied air superiority. It took part in raids on Berlin, shielded the Normandy landings, intercepted Me-262 jets, and became a weapon the enemy could no longer ignore. With the Mustang, the systematic destruction of the Luftwaffe began in the air, then on takeoff and landing, and then on the airfields themselves. By early 1944, the war in Europe had entered a decisive phase. The Allies were planning the Normandy invasion, and Germany was still desperately defending its airspace to blunt the destruction raining down on its cities and factories. Berlin, the heart of the Third Reich, the symbol of its power and ideological madness, became a target not only of political but strategic significance. And it was there, at the very core of German airspace, that bombers first went under escort by P-51 Mustangs. It was a turning point in the air war, and the Mustang played a key role. The first major raid on Berlin with Mustang escort took place on March 4, 1944. Until then, Allied bombers could only dream of escort all the way to the Reich's capital. German interceptors simply waited for the escorts to turn back and then tore into unprotected bomber squadrons, downing dozens. Now the situation changed, the Mustang's range with drop tanks exceeded 1,000 kilometers, and pilots were ready to escort flying fortresses from Britain to the target and back. But the mission was no cakewalk. German airspace was saturated with flak batteries, and the Luftwaffe still fielded seasoned pilots in fast Bf-109s and Fw-190s. Yet the Merlin Mustang outclassed them in speed and high-altitude performance. During this first raid on Berlin, Mustangs not only protected most of the bombers but shot down over 10 German aircraft with minimal losses. For the Allies, it was not just a tactical victory but a moral one. After that raid, a series of attacks followed that completely changed the Reich's defensive strategy. The Luftwaffe was forced to scramble everything it had left, leading to more frequent and more desperate battles. The Mustang did more than escort, it began to hunt. Fighters pursued German aircraft not only in the air but during their withdrawal, sometimes striking entire airfields and seizing superiority at the outset. One emblematic moment came from Ace James Gentleman Jim Howard, who single-handedly defended an entire bomber formation from an attack by 30 German aircraft. His P-51, Ding Hao, became a legend, and Howard became the first Mustang pilot awarded the Medal of Honor. It was then that German pilots realized the new American machines could be deadly even to the Luftwaffe's elite. By spring 1944, the battle for Berlin had become constant. Mustangs escorted each new wave of bombers and then launched mass attacks on rail yards, factories, and airfields. It was total air war. Thanks to maneuverability and range, the Mustang was ideal for free hunts, where pilots picked targets on the way home: trains, trucks, lone fighters, anything that moved. By summer it was clear, the Luftwaffe couldn't replace its losses. The number of experienced pilots was plummeting. Many rookies, newly seated in Messerschmitts, died in their first combat, felled by Mustangs sweeping in from above, faster, and striking without warning. Berlin was under aerial siege, its war industry battered. The Mustang played a decisive role in undermining German defenses before Operation Overlord, the Normandy landings. Without control of the air, no landing would have had a chance. Thanks to the Mustang and its pilots, it became possible. As a result of the battle for Berlin, the Mustang finally secured its status as king of the sky. Over Europe it became the one feared, trusted, and mythologized. Its role was colossal, not only in performing missions but in shaping the war's strategy. It was the moment the Mustang entered history not just as a machine but as a symbol of inevitable victory. Once the Mustang dominated European skies, it seemed the Allies were now unbeatable. Yet in late 1944 Germany unveiled a new weapon, the world's first mass-produced jet fighter, the Messerschmitt Me 262, capable of speeds over 850 km per hour. It was a revolutionary threat. Faster than anything the Allies had, armed to shred bombers in seconds. Next to the Me 262, even the mighty, piston-engine Mustang looked outdated. Yet the Mustang became the aircraft that found a way to fight Hitler's jet swallows. Recon pilots first spotted the Me 262. Their reports alarmed U.S. Air Force headquarters. The new fighter roared into the sky with shocking acceleration, outrunning any propeller plane. Its tactic was simple: wait for the bombers, strike them at immense speed with a hail of 30mm shells, then break away, denying any chance of reply. Fear of the new weapon was so strong the Allies sought countermeasures at once. The secret to hunting the Me 262 was soon found. Despite its speed advantage, the jet was vulnerable during takeoff, landing, and acceleration. Its engines needed time to spool, and its low-speed maneuverability was poor. The Mustangs exploited this. Pilots began to lurk near enemy airfields, patrolling the approaches and striking swallows at their most vulnerable moments, takeoff and landing. These missions were called barrier sweeps, and they became a nightmare for Germany's Reich defenders. With excellent high-altitude performance and climb, the P-51 could hit first. The Germans tried desperately to shield airfields with flak and fighters, but it wasn't enough. The Mustangs kept their promise. One of the most famous pilots to down an Me 262 was Lt. Chuck Yeager, the future first man to break the sound barrier. He shot his Me 262 on November 6, 1944. In his report he noted, "They're fast as hell, but they turn like bricks." That line captured the essence of the duel. The Me 262 might be elusive, but the Mustang was the hunter. Another memorable fight came on November 7, 1944, when Mustangs of the 359th Fighter Group intercepted a group of Me 262s taking off from Akmar. The attack was so swift and bold that the Germans hadn't even retracted their gear. The Allies downed 5 jets that day for the loss of a single aircraft. It shocked the German command. After all, the Me 262 was more than a new fighter, it was a symbol of the technological edge Berlin still hoped to wield. But against the Mustang, technology alone was not enough. The Allies had strategy, tactics, and numbers, and the Mustang had something else: it forgave pilot error, it was reliable and predictable. Unlike finicky jet engines, the Merlin did not falter and let the pilot fight the way he wanted. By war's end, Mustangs had downed more than a dozen Me 262s under unequal conditions. They proved that speed alone doesn't decide wars. Tactics do. People do. And so does the ability to use your strengths. In the German skies, the Mustang showed that even with the arrival of cutting-edge technology, the old laws of air combat altitude, surprise, precision, still ruled. When Germany fell, the Mustang and Me-262 remained in museums as symbols of different eras. But history remembers the Mustang as the victor. It proved that a well-designed piston fighter could not only survive but defeat the first jets. It was a triumph of not just technology but strategy, and a victory that hastened the end of the war. When the Allies had firmly seized control of the European skies, the Mustang took on a new role not only as an escort fighter but as an active hunter of enemy ground targets. This tactic, informally dubbed fratricide, consisted of highly aggressive strikes on enemy infrastructure, trains, columns, tanks, airfields, factories, bridges. The Mustang now waged war not only in the sky, it became a nightmare for anything that moved or stood on German-held ground. The 8th Air Force was among the first to employ this tactic. When bombers finished raids on strategic targets, rail hubs, oil depots, industrial sites, Mustang pilots didn't head straight home. They used their remaining fuel to hunt on their own. Pilots dropped to minimal altitude, skimming roads, fields, and rivers, searching for concentrations of vehicles, trains, and munitions. The Mustang was ideal for such tasks: high speed to break away from fire, powerful 0.50 cal Browning machine guns to chew through light armor and trucks, and extraordinary range to peek deep into enemy territory. Pilots raked locomotive cabs, blew up engines, and collapsed civilian and military bridges, disrupting German logistics almost faster than the bombers did. The most dramatic episodes were hunts against German armored trains bristling with flak. Mustangs often attacked in waves from different directions, creating a deadly crossfire. Germans feared the Mustang as they once feared penal assault units. These fighters struck suddenly, mercilessly, worked fast, and vanished, leaving no chance to respond. Among Mustang pilots, low-level attacks were a matter of honor. Many set personal goals: 10 trains by war's end, 50 vehicles. Ace George Preddy, in a single sortie, destroyed 2 fuel tankers, an artillery depot, and an officer's mess on Dresden's outskirts. Commanders approved. Every destroyed wagon meant delayed ammunition, fuel, medicine. The Mustang became a weapon that didn't just fight, it broke the machinery of war. Most impressive was the Mustang's power against airfields. Many German strips became graveyards for dozens of aircraft, partially disassembled, damaged, or preparing for sorties. The Mustang swept over them, shredding everything in range. Over time, more than 1,000 aircraft were destroyed on the ground, losses German industry could no longer replace. By spring 1945, the phrase "if you're on the ground, you're vulnerable" had become the Luftwaffe's grim motto. The Mustang now ruled not only at altitude, it ruled everywhere. And that hastened the war's end. Equipment got no fuel, troops no supplies, generals no communications. The Mustang became not just an airplane of war, but a symbol of the Third Reich's inevitable defeat. One of the brightest and most symbolic chapters in the Mustang's story was the service of the U.S. Army Air Force's 332nd Fighter Group, better known as the Tuskegee Airmen or the Red Tails. They became legends not only for combat prowess but because the unit was composed entirely of African American pilots at a time when racial segregation still existed in the United States. Their path, like the Mustang's, was full of overcoming. In the end, they not only inscribed their name in the history of the war, they did it with true valor, skill, and discipline. The Red Tails earned their nickname from the distinctive red paint on their P-51's tail surfaces. It was a kind of badge of confidence and audacity. Germans began to recognize the group's Mustangs in the air, and even their own pilots learned to respect them. Where those red arrows flew, the bombers came home, and that was an indisputable fact. The motto "No bombers lost" became the group's calling card. Throughout their service in Europe, the Tuskegee pilots did not let a single bomber under their protection be shot down. Their service began in Italy in February 1944. They initially flew P-40s and P-47s, but true fame came with the Mustang. Thanks to the P-51's range and speed, they became ideal guardians for bomber groups striking Vienna, Budapest, Berlin, Ploiești, and other key industrial centers. With courage and professionalism, they earned the respect even of those who had doubted them at first. A particularly memorable fight occurred on March 24, 1945, when the Red Tails escorted bombers over Berlin and engaged Me-262 jets. In that battle, they shot down 3 jets, proof that their skills and tactics stood among the best of the war. German jet pilots acknowledged that Mustangs with red tails were especially dangerous. These pilots didn't back off, didn't fear, and didn't lose control. The Tuskegee pilots didn't just do their job, they did it with honor and precision. It's held that over the years they flew more than 300 combat missions, shot down 112 enemy aircraft, and damaged or destroyed over 1,000 ground targets, crippling dozens of trains, barges, and depots, all with relatively low losses, thanks in part to strict discipline and a grown-up escort doctrine that put bomber protection above everything else. The group's commander, Col. Benjamin O. Davis Jr., later became the first African-American general in the U.S. Air Force. He insisted his pilots avoid chasing personal glory and follow mission objectives strictly. "We're not here to shoot down airplanes," he said. "We're here to bring the bombers home." The Tuskegee Airmen became not just combat legends but symbols that talent, honor, and courage know no color. After the war, veterans of this group were welcomed as heroes, and their story helped turn American public opinion toward racial equality. And in that legend, the Mustang was not merely their airplane, it was their weapon, their ally, and their wings. Red tails and red-tailed Mustangs became an inseparable part of the story of victory. Although the Mustang's main fame is tied to the European theater, its role was not limited to escorting bombers over Germany. The P-51 became a universal weapon. It was used in Italy and over the Pacific, 2 fronts where it proved itself in very different ways, confirming its status as one of World War I's most effective fighters. Italy was the Mustang's first experimental zone. After Allied landings in Sicily and southern Italy in 1943, they needed to secure air superiority and push northward against well-entrenched German divisions. Italy's geography, mountains, valleys, narrow roads, demanded a long-range, highly maneuverable, reliable fighter. The Mustang fit perfectly. It escorted bombers and flew solo deep into enemy territory, attacking columns, airfields, and bridges. Intercepting German transport runs proved especially valuable. Allies sought to choke off supplies to the front. The Mustang quickly adapted to masked approaches in mountainous terrain, striking and slipping away without coming under fire. The Italian front was also where the Red Tails, the 332nd Group, earned their early renown. At the same time, Mustangs began appearing at the other end of the world over the Pacific. Unlike Europe, the air war there had different dynamics: vast distances between islands, scarce airfields, tropical weather, and fierce Japanese defenses. In 1945, Mustangs, primarily P-51DS, replaced aging Curtiss P-40s and other earlier fighters. Even under these harsh conditions, the Mustang proved its worth. With a range up to 2,000 kilometers on tanks, high speed, and excellent high-altitude performance, it became indispensable for escorting B-29 superfortresses bombing Japan. Where bombers had previously flown almost unescorted, the Mustang became their salvation, especially during strikes on Tokyo, Osaka, and Nagoya. The most famous example was the raid on Tokyo on April 7, 1945, when more than 100 Mustangs escorted B-29s at 8 kilometers altitude. Engaging Japanese Ki-84s and S-6M0s, they proved that even across huge distances, amid strong opposition and isolated island bases, the Mustang remained a dominant combat machine. By the end of the war, the Mustang was used on all major fronts: Europe, Italy, the Balkans, China, Burma, and across the Pacific Islands. It became the face of Allied air power, a symbol of mobility, firepower, and technical progress. While other aircraft faded, the Mustang kept winning in the sky, over the sea, in mountains and jungle alike. When the guns finally fell silent and World War II ended, the Mustang was no longer just a fighter. It had become a legend, a symbol of Allied air power, and one of the chief instruments of victory. But the Mustang's story did not end with the last whirl of the prop. On the contrary, its post-war fate was no less significant. By war's end, the Mustang was the very standard of a fighter. In parades, newsreels, and cinema, its silhouette was recognized worldwide. Across Europe, Asia, and the Pacific, it left an indelible mark. More than 15,000 Mustangs were built, second only in U.S. fighter production, but first in popularity among pilots and aces. 276 pilots became aces in the Mustang, including George Preddy, Chuck Yeager, and Donald Blakesley. After the war, many countries, including Britain, Australia, Canada, and the Netherlands, operated the Mustang. Argentina became the largest post-war user, flying them into the 1960s. Poland, New Zealand, and Israel used them as well, and South Korean pilots flew Mustangs in the Korean War against Soviet-built MiG-15s already in the jet age. The Mustang also inspired a new era of aviation sport, piston aircraft racing. Its powerful engine, aerodynamics, and handling made it a favorite at events like the Reno Air Races, where it remains popular even today. Decades on, its signature whistle in a diving pass still stirs crowds. Perhaps the brightest example of the Mustang's legacy is that it helped usher in the space age. The famed Mustang pilot Chuck Yeager, in 1947, became the first person to break the sound barrier, and he admitted that everything he knew about high speed, he learned in the cockpit of a P-51. The Mustang became more than a weapon. It became a symbol of union, the British engine, American design, and Allied pilots. It fathered new technologies, from laminar wings to fuel systems that fed engines through high-G maneuvers. Today, hundreds of Mustangs have been restored and fly in private collections, museums, and at airshows. It doesn't merely remind us of itself, it lives on in the sky. You can see its silhouette on logos, in films, books, and games, and its name still stands alongside legends like the Spitfire, Zero, and Yak-3. At the end of the war, the Mustang did the most important thing: it helped the world take a step toward peace. Though made of aluminum, fire, and speed, in its heart was that belief from which legends are forged. It remains in the history of military aviation as the fighter that arrived in time and did not fail.